Supply Network Dynamics, Chapter 3, Part 9. This is an example of organizational filters. The fact is that nowadays companies are drowning in data. The Economist a couple of years ago called it even the data deluge. And if that's so, then why don't they make better use of it? One of my master students, Albert Lukkenhorst, did a master thesis project which gives a nice case study of this. It's called Drowning in Data, and it took place in a professional services company. And it explains with a large number of quotes from the people actually involved the many very sensible reasons why people do not share the right data and do not take the right decisions, even though they do not have cognitive filters, or that's not the main thing. They behave fairly rational. They are not primed or framed in such a way that they actually are cheated in something else. No, they very consciously and very smartly decide on courses of actions which are in the short run, or perhaps even in the long run, but definitely in the short run good for their career, but in the long run and even in the short run, are clearly not good for their company's performance. So this took place in a business unit that had considerable performance problems and management problems and business intelligence problems, and I asked Albert to look out especially for any quotes that people might give explaining why they worked the way they did. And what he found was that he grouped his findings into 5 reasons why managers actually don't try to improve the management information and decision making. And this looks a bit like the list of Eckhoff so many years ago, but still this is very fresh and recent. First of all, managers don't know what information they need. I'll just cite the quotes because the quotes really tell it all. At one moment in time, there were 10 extensive breakdowns produced for a weekly production meeting. But after a while, the data analyst observed that many of these reports didn't provide the added value management hoped for. So they got the data analysis at the request of managers, but managers didn't use them, didn't understand them. And so they simply stopped making them. The IT specialist. It's too bad that this senior manager already left within 1 year, because we made all these reports for him and now we have to start all over again. The cycle time of management is very severe drain on any quality of managerial decision making, because it takes time to understand the field and to find the data that you need. If you then already leave, indeed you have to start over again. A supply manager. In an ideal situation, people should be in the same position for at least 2 or 3 years, and then they would not only make decisions but also experience the effects of their decisions. Now there is no learning. We'll return to this later on. Yeah, sure. Sorry about this. Secondly, managers don't want to escalate and share data. So here we talk about vertical information systems, sharing data with others higher up in the organization. Why would you not want to do that? Tell everybody what's happening. Well, for one thing, one quote was, senior management only wants to see this very condensed. They look at this graph for about 5 seconds. This is one of those misunderstandings that higher management needs to see everything in PowerPoint slides, very condensed. Yes, you should make complex matter as simple as possible, but not beyond that. Not everything fits in a PowerPoint or in a bullet point. And so, why bother making an accurate picture? They just want one number and you can't convey everything in one number. The line manager. Well, let's not share this information because it can be interpreted negatively if you don't look at it carefully enough. And we don't get time to explain the deeper subtleties about this. Yet another line manager. When it became clear that if this information would be transferred upstream, up the line of command, it would be clear that actually 4 FTE of people wouldn't be needed given the current workloads. Well, we should keep those data to ourselves. You don't want to give the information that takes away your own people, do you? Oh, here's another one. But you know what? Don't worry about the small dip in January. Because now that January is bad, we will be showing very nice improvement over the years. And people will forget that it was a dip in January. They will just see that it's a nice increase compared to the rest of the time. So actually very good dips in January. 3. People are actually incentivized to manipulate data and data definition. Which means that if they change data, they are rewarded, not punished. Here's an example. Operations managers. This backlog of late work items here has been there for so long. Is it actually our backlog? Shouldn't it be somebody else's backlog because it's there for so long? Seems that our focus on backlog doesn't help us get rid of the backlog. And so the definition was changed so that this particular part of very nasty backlog was no longer on their target list. A data analyst. For some reason I changed the definition of work in progress inventory, and the line manager came to thank me because I changed the definition. Actually, his official backlog decreased by 75%. Not because he did anything, but because I changed the definition. He didn't understand anything more, but he all of a sudden had achieved his targets. Team leader. If you compare my department to the others, mine has more red orders, but which is orders that are late, etc. However, that's not fair. These departments are different. Of course, they are always different, and perhaps it's not fair. But if you take away the data, you can't even make a comparison. Data analyst. What this data analyst found is that managers delete certain data. For instance, to decrease the number of late orders in the chains, they can delete the data field which contains the commercial date of this order. And if there is no commercial date on which this order officially was finished, it's always on time. And when you do that in a spreadsheet, you can't show that actually first there was a number and now there isn't. It can be overwritten and it doesn't register who makes those changes or if there were changes at all. So at my university we had Diederik Stapel, the professor of psychology who invented spreadsheets. This is an example of the other way around. You can simply swipe spreadsheets clean and get away with it. You are incentivized to do so. There is no punishment, just a reward. Fourthly, managers can manipulate the KPIs against which they are rewarded. Not so much change the data, but change the values of the data. There was a KPI which measured whether or not a customer received a delivery promise within 5 to 15 days after order intake. Once it's beyond those 15 days, they simply forget about it because they never can win that order anymore. They focus on the rest that's within 15 days. So the poor customer that isn't served within 15 days is even worse off. Nobody cares about them anymore. Although, of course, after 15 days, the real problems start to arrive. A data analysis. Why would the manager of this department give orders to register rework? No one in this organization is worried about rework. And why? Well, reducing rework isn't rewarded. And if you actually know the real rework figures, you see how much how bad actually we are doing and how much room there is for improvement, which is a lot. And then people might start to ask questions up in the chain of command. Why aren't you doing that already? So let's not show the data. Let's not even measure the data for rework, because then people can't blame us for not improving there. Line manager. This was after a high-profile consultancy made some calculations on productivity in this at the employee level. We do not recognize the productivity numbers on activity level clocked by the external consultants, and so they used a definition of productivity that ignored their findings. The external consultants were happy because their bills were paid. The employees were happy because, and of course the line manager was happy. The one group that wasn't happy is the customers of this company, because productivity didn't increase and so performance towards them remained miserable. Here's a line manager in a sales and operations planning, SNOP planning. I do not recognize the data you base your conclusion on. And you know what? This is also a classic. It's much more complex. That's a classical way of presenting a cloud among findings. So this is simple. It's much more complex than that, and they make it bigger and bigger and more complex, and all the time leading you away from the actual numbers, which are not good at all. Fifth one. The supply network that all this takes place is simply too complex for managers to understand. Hey, listen, your order type, less than 1% of our orders. We don't want to increase our efforts to gather this information as you first forecast better. Yeah, but perhaps that 1% has a disproportionate effect on the overall performance. Planner, our department makes up only 5 days of a total lead time of 20 weeks. So why worry about those 5 days? Start looking at the rest of the organization first, those 20 weeks. Yes, but perhaps in those 5 days you can have a major impact. At least nobody looks at the 20 weeks. That is a valid complaint that you could make here, apparently. I know who does look at the 20 weeks. The customer does. Operation manager. Sales uses product classification on commercial grounds to calculate the price for the customer. But for us, other measurements are much more important for production control. But these figures, they are not recorded at the beginning of the progress. What is recorded at the beginning of the progress, when sale is still holding the baton stick, is sales data. And for production data, they need other stuff. Line managers, we don't know how we can adjust our capacity at the right time because we have no clue what actually the reaction will be if we change capacity downstream in the supply chain. And we don't have a clue of what's happening upstream either. During an operation control meeting, apparently our upstream party cleaned their windowsill and it contains a large backlog, and now we didn't even know these orders existed. Now we have a pile of orders all of a sudden. Or in this case, it takes several millions to completely redesign the system for the supply network, but we can't prove that we actually will earn the money back within a reasonable time frame. So you know what? Let's not improve them. In summary, and this is a causal loop diagram that my student made at the end of his thesis, all these quotes I gave are also pointing to certain elements in reinforcing feedback loops. And what he found was a number of reinforcing feedback loops which together all lead to downward spirals of performance and are extremely hard to reverse. And so all these people make very sensible decisions, and in the end organizational performance only gets worse. It's a sad story.